Welcome to the virtual Orange County Finals of the Merriam-Webster-Stark Contest in Reading and Declamation. This year marks the 116th consecutive year of the Stark Reading Contest. The contest was begun in 1904 by Merriam-Webster-Stark, who had a love for reading and who was an avid collector of rare books and manuscripts. Her son, Letcher, continued the contest even after Miriam Stark's death in 1936, and Letcher's wife, Nelda, continued the contest after Letcher Stark died in 1965. In 1976, the Stark Reading Contest became a qualified scholarship program of the Nelda C. and H.J. Letcher Stark Foundation, which is a private foundation established by Nelda and Letcher Stark nearly 60 years ago in 1961. Despite changes in the Orange school districts over the years, the Stark Reading Contest continued without interruption. It even occurred during World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, and other times of turmoil. The early years of the contest included both junior high and high school levels, but for the past few decades, the contest has been exclusive to high school students. In 2001, the contest was expanded to include all 5 Orange County public high schools. The contest awards have changed and grown over the years as well. In the early years, Stark Reading Contest winners at the junior high level received pen and pencil sets, while high school winners received watches. The Stark Foundation continued the tradition of awarding watches to all finalists at the county level, but in the late 1970s, the foundation also began to award scholarships. The amounts of the scholarship awards have grown over the years. From 1977 to 2019, more than $800,000 in scholarship money has been paid toward the higher education of Stark Reading Contest winners. This year, 96 students from Bridge City, Little Cypress, Mauriceville, Orangefield, Vidor, and West Orange Stark High Schools competed in the school levels of the Stark Reading Contest. The students who advanced in the categories of interpretive reading and declamation from each high school have submitted at-home recordings of their selections, and in doing so, each has received an additional $1,000 added to their local final earnings. While there will not be first and second place winners or judges this year, we hope you enjoy the presentations of these selections.
Advice to Youth was written by Mark Twain in 1882 and uses his classic comedic style to establish a satirical commentary on the lessons often taught to children. Mark Twain, Advice to Youth. Being told I would be expected to talk here, I inquired what sort of talk I ought to make. They said it should be something suitable to youth, something didactic, instructive, or something in the nature of good advice. Very well. I have a few things in my mind which I have often longed to say for the instruction of the young, for it is in one's tender early years that such things will best take root, and be most enduring and most valuable. First, then, I will say to you, my young friends, and I say it beseechingly, urgently, always obey your parents, when they are present. This is the best policy in the long run, because if you don't, they will make you. Most parents think they know better than you, and you can generally make more by humoring that superstition than you can by acting on your own, better judgment. Be respectful to your superiors, if you have any, also to strangers, and sometimes to others. If a person offends you, and you are in doubt as to whether it was intentional or not, do not resort to extreme measures. Simply watch your chance, and hit him with a brick. Yes, that will be sufficient. If you shall find that he had not intended any offense, come out frankly and confess yourself in the wrong when you struck him. Acknowledge it like a man, and say you didn't mean to. Yes, always avoid violence. In this age of charity and kindliness, the time has gone by for such things. Leave dynamite to the low and unrefined. Go to bed early. Get up early. This is wise. Some authorities say get up with the sun. Some say get up with one thing, others with another. But a lark is really the best thing to get up with. It gives you a splendid reputation with everybody to know that you get up with the lark. And if you get the right kind of lark and work at him right, You can easily train him to get up at 9:30 every time. It's no trick at all. Now, as to the matter of lying, you want to be very careful about lying. Otherwise, you are nearly sure to get caught. Once caught, you can never again be, in the eyes of the good and the pure, what you were before. Many a young person has injured himself permanently through a single, clumsy, and ill-finished lie, the result of carelessness, born of incomplete training. Some authorities hold that the young ought not to lie at all. That, of course, is putting it rather stronger than necessary. Still, while I cannot go quite so far as that, I do maintain, and I believe I am right, that the young ought to be temperate in the use of this great art, until practice and experience shall give them that confidence, elegance, and precision, which alone can make the accomplishment graceful and profitable. Patience, diligence, painstaking attention to detail. These are requirements. These, in time, will make the student perfect. Upon these only may he rely as the sure foundation for future eminence. Think what tedious years of study, thought, practice, experience went to the equipment of that peerless old master who was able to impose upon the whole world the lofty and sounding maxim that truth is might and will prevail. The most majestic compound fracture of fact which any of woman born has yet achieved. For the history of our race and each individual's experience are sown thick with evidences that a truth is not hard to kill, and that a lie well told is immortal. There is in Boston a monument of the man who discovered anesthesia. Many people are aware, in these latter days, that that man didn't discover it at all, but stole the discovery from another man. Is this truth mighty, and will it prevail? No, my hearers. The monument is made of hardy metal, but the lie it tells will outlast it 1,000,000 years. An awkward, feeble, leaky lie is a thing which you ought to make it your unceasing study to avoid. Such a lie as that has no more real permanence than an average truth. Why, you might as well tell the truth at once and be done with it. A feeble, stupid, preposterous lie will not live 2 years, except it be a slander upon somebody. It is indestructible then, of course, but that is no merit of yours. A final word. Begin your practice of this gracious and beautiful art early. Begin now. If I had begun earlier, I could have learned how. Never handle firearms carelessly. The sorrow and suffering that have been caused by heedless handling of firearms by the young. Only 4 days ago, right in the next farmhouse to the one where I'm spending the summer, a grandmother, old and gray and sweet, one of the loveliest spirits in the land, was sitting at her work, when her young grandson crept in and got down an old, battered, rusty gun, which had not been touched for many years, and was supposed not to be loaded, and pointed it at her, laughing and threatening to shoot. In her fright, she ran screaming and pleading toward the door on the other side of the room, but as she passed him, he placed the gun almost against her very breast, and pulled the trigger. He had supposed it was not loaded. And he was right. It wasn't. So there wasn't any harm done. It is the only case of that kind I have ever heard of. Therefore, just the same, don't you meddle with old unloaded firearms. They are the most deadly and unerring things that have ever been created by man. You don't have to take any pains at all with them. You don't have to have a rest. You don't have to have any sights on the gun. You don't have to take aim even. No. You just pick out a relative and bang away, and you're sure to get him. A youth who can't hit a cathedral at 30 yards with a Gatling gun in 3/4 of an hour can take up an old empty musket and bag his grandmother every time at 100. Think what Waterloo would have been if one of the armies had been boys armed with muskets supposed not to be loaded, and the other army had been composed of their female relations. The very thought of it makes one shudder. There are many sorts of books, but good ones are the sort for the young to read. Remember that. They are a great, inestimable, and unspeakable means of improvement. Therefore, be careful in your selection, my young friends. Confine yourselves exclusively to Robertson's sermons, Baxter's Saint Rest, The Innocents Abroad, and works of that kind. But I have said enough. I hope you will treasure up the instructions which I have given you. Make them a guide to your feet and a light to your understanding. Build your character thoughtfully and painstakingly upon these precepts. And by, when you've got it built, you will be surprised and gratified to see how nicely and sharply it resembles everybody else's. Thank you.
More than 30 years after her own graduation, Nora Ephron returned to her alma mater to give the commencement address to the Wellesley College class of 1996. In her speech, the 1962 graduate told detailed anecdotes of her own experience at the college while giving insight towards the women's movement. Through her wit, Ephron was able to make the graduates stay memorable, but the advice she provided them would help them for the rest of their lives. Dear class of 1996, I am so proud of you. Thank you for asking me to speak to you today. I had a wonderful time trying to imagine who had been ahead of me on the list. I was positive you'd have gone to Martha Stewart first. She will probably be up here telling you how to turn your lovely black robes into tents. I will try to be at least as helpful, if not quite as specific as that. I want to tell you a little bit about my class, the class of 1962. We went to college in the era where you got a master's degree in teaching because it was something to fall back on in the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario being that no one married you and you actually had to go to work. As a classmate said at our reunion, our education was a dress rehearsal for a life we never led. Isn't that the saddest line? We weren't meant to have futures. We were meant to marry them. I've written about my years at Wellesley, and I don't want to repeat myself any more than is necessary. But I do want to retell one anecdote. My junior year, I was engaged for a very short period of time. I went to see my class dean, and she said to me, "Let me give you some advice. When you marry, take a year off. Devote yourself to your husband and your family." Of course, it was a stunning piece of advice to give me because I'd always intended to work after college. Take a year off, being a wife. I always wondered what I was supposed to do during that year. Iron? I repeated the story for years as proof that Wellesley wanted its graduates to be merely housewives. But I turned out to be wrong, because years later, I met another Wellesley graduate who had been as hell-bent on domesticity as I had been on a career. The same dean had said to her, "Don't have children right away. Take a year to work." I saw that what Wellesley wanted was for us to avoid the extremes. We were to be that thing in the middle, a lady. We were to take the fabulous education we had received here and use it to preside at dinner table or at committee meeting. And when two people disagreed, we would be intelligent enough to step in and point out the remarkable similarities between their two opposing positions. We were to spend our lives making nice. Many of my classmates did exactly what they were supposed to when they graduated from Wellesley, and some of them, by the way, lived happily ever after. But many of them didn't. All sorts of things happened that no one expected. They needed money, so they had to work. They got divorced, so they had to work. They were bored witless, so they had to work. The women's movement came along and made harsh judgments about their lives, judgments that caught them by surprise, because they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. Weren't they? They had never intended to be the heroines of their own lives. They'd intended to be first ladies, I guess. First ladies in the lives of big men. They ended up feeling like victims. They ended up, and this is really sad, thinking that their years in college were the best years of their lives. Your education is a dress rehearsal for a life that is yours to lead. And above all, be the heroine of your life, not the victim. This is the season when a clutch of successful women, who have it all, give speeches to women like you and say, to be perfectly honest, you can't have it all. But in case any of you are wondering, of course you can have it all. What are you going to do? Everything is my guess. It will be a little messy, but embrace the mess. It will be complicated, but rejoice in the complications. And don't be frightened. You can always change your mind. I know. I've had 4 careers and 3 husbands. And this is something else I want to tell you. You are not going to be you, fixed and immutable you, forever. We have a game we play when we're waiting for tables in restaurants where you have to write the 5 things that describe yourself on a piece of paper. When I was your age, I would have put ambitious, Wellesley graduate, daughter, Democrat, single. 10 years later, not one of those things turned up on my list. I was journalist, feminist, New Yorker, divorced, funny. Today, not one of those 5 things turns up in my list. Writer, director, mother, sister, happy. Whatever those 5 things are for you today, they won't make the list in 10 years. Not that you still won't be some of those things, but they won't be the 5 most important things about you. Whatever you choose, however many roads you travel, I hope that you choose not to be a lady. I hope you will find some way to break the rules and make a little trouble out there. And I also hope that you will choose to make some of that trouble on behalf of women. Thank you. Good luck. The first act of your life is over. Welcome to the best years of your lives.
In Lamott's 2003 UC Berkeley commencement speech, she explores the concept of being true to yourself while following your passions. She expresses that success comes from the fulfillment that life has to offer throughout her speech. I'm honored that you asked me to speak here today. This must be a magical day for you. I wouldn't know. I accidentally forgot to graduate from college. I met 30 years ago, but things got away from me. I went to Goucher College in Maryland for the best possible reasons, to learn. But then I dropped out at 19 for the best possible reasons, to become a writer. Instead, I accidentally became a clerk typist where I worked typing and sorting forms. I hate to complain, but it was not very stimulating work. But it paid the bills so I could write my stories every night when I got home. I worked for 6 months. It was a terrible job at which I did a terrible job. At 20, I got hired at a magazine as an assistant editor, and I think that's the last real job I've ever had. I bet I'm beginning to make your parents really nervous. Here I am sort of bragging about being a dropout and unemployable and secretly making a pitch for you to follow your creative dreams when what they want for you is to do well in your field, make them look good, and maybe make a tiny fortune. But that's not your problem. Your problem is how you're going to spend this one odd and precious life you've been issued. Whether you're going to try and spend it looking good and creating the illusion that you have power over people and circumstances, or whether you're going to taste it, enjoy it, and find out the truth about who you are. At some point, I finally started getting published and experiencing a meager not-standing in the literary world, and I started to get almost everything many of you are hoping for, except for the money. Slowly, after dozens of rejection slips and failures and false starts and postponed dreams, I stepped onto the hollowed ground of being a published novelist, and then 15 years later, I even started making real money. I'd been wanting to be a successful author my whole life, but when I finally did it, I was like the greyhound catching the mechanical rabbit she'd been chasing all her life. Metal, wrapped up in cloth. It wasn't alive, it had no spirit, it was fake. And fake doesn't feed anything. Only spirit feeds spirit. In the same way, only your own blood type can sustain you. I want to tell you, what you're looking for is already inside of you. You've heard this before, but the holy thing inside of you really is what causes you to seek it. You can't buy it, lease it, sell it, date it, rent it, or apply for it. The best job in the world can't give it to you. Neither can success, or fame, or financial security, besides which there ain't no such thing. So it can be confusing. Most of your parents want you to do well, to be successful. They want you to be happy, or at least happy-ish. They want you to love and to be loved and to find peace and to laugh and find meaningful work. But they also, some of them, a few of them, not yours are fine. They want you to chase the bunny for a little while, to get ahead, and then find a balance between the greyhound bunny chase and savoring your life. But the thing is, you don't know if you're going to live long enough to slow down, relax, have fun, and discover the truth of your spiritual identity. You may not be destined to live a long life. You may not have 60 more years to discover and claim your own deepest truth. You have to live every day as if it's your last, because one of these days you're bound to be right. So, I thought it might help if I just went ahead and told you what I think the truth of your spiritual identity is. Actually, I don't have a clue. I do know it's not what you look like or what you did in school, and whether or not you start a job next Monday or not. Spirit isn't what you do, it's, well, again, I don't actually know. They probably taught this junior year at Goucher. It's magic to see spirit largely because it's so rare. Mostly, you see the holograms that the culture presents as real. You see how you're doing the world's eyes, or your parents', or worst of all, yours, or in the eyes of the people who are doing better than you, much better than you, or worse. But you are not your bank account or your ambitiousness. You are not the cold clay lump with a big belly you leave behind when you die. You are spirit. You are love, and you are free. You are here to love and to be loved freely. Rest and laughter are the most spiritual and subversive acts of all. Laugh, rest, slow down. Some of you start jobs Monday. Some of you desperately wish that you did. Some of your parents are asthmatic with anxiety that you don't. They shared this with me before the ceremony began. I would recommend that you all just take a long, deep breath and stop. You are graduating today. Refuse to cooperate with anyone who is trying to shame you into hopping right back up onto that rat exercise wheel. You've graduated. You got nothing left to prove, and besides, it's a fool's game. If you agree to play, you've already lost. It's Charlie Brown and Lucy with the football. If you keep getting back on the field, they win. There are so many great things to do right now. Write, sing, rest, eat cherries. So, bless you. You've done an amazing thing. You are capable of lives of great joy and great meaning. It's what you were made of, and it's what you're made for. So take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Thank you.
Barack Obama's 2009 inaugural address brought hope and unity to a country overwhelmed with fear over political and economic turmoil. His message to the American people to remember the values that the nation was founded upon are what make this speech still memorable today. Barack Obama's 2009 inaugural address. My fellow citizens, I stand here today humbled by the task before us, grateful for the trust you bestowed, and mindful of the sacrifices borne by our ancestors. 44 Americans have now taken the presidential oath. The words have been spoken during rising tides of prosperity and the still waters of peace. Yet, every so often, the oath is taken amidst gathering clouds and raging storms. At these moments, America has carried on not simply because of the skill or vision of those in high office, but because we, the people, have remained faithful to the ideals of our forebears and true to our founding documents. So it has been, and so it must be with this generation of Americans. Now, there are some who question the scale of our ambitions, who suggest that our system cannot tolerate too many big plans. But their memories are short, for they have forgotten what America has already done. What free men and women can achieve when imagination is joined to common purpose and necessity to courage. What the cynics fail to understand is that the ground has shifted beneath them, that the stale political arguments that have consumed us for so long no longer apply. We are the keepers of this legacy. Guided by these principles once more, we can meet those new threats that demand even greater effort and even greater cooperation and understanding between nations. We will not apologize for our way of life, nor will we waver in its defense. And for those who seek to advance their aims by inducing terror and slaughtering innocents, we say to you now that our spirit is stronger and cannot be broken. You cannot outlast us, and we will defeat you. For we know that our patchwork heritage is a strength, not a weakness. We are a nation of Christians and Muslims, Jews and Hindus and non-believers. We are shaped by every language and culture drawn from every end of this earth, and because we have tasted the bitter swill of civil war and segregation and emerged from that dark chapter stronger and more united, we cannot help but believe that the old hatred shall someday pass, that the lines of tribes shall soon dissolve, that as the world grows smaller, our common humanity shall reveal itself, and that America must play its role in ushering in a new era of peace. To those who cling to power through corruption and deceit and the silencing of dissent, know that you are on the wrong side of history, but that we will extend a hand if you're willing to unclench your fist. To the people of poor nations, we pledge to work alongside you to make your farms flourish and let clean waters flow, to nourish starved bodies and feed hungry minds. And to those nations like ours that enjoy relative plenty, we say that we can no longer afford the indifference and suffering outside of our borders, nor can we consume the world's resources without regard to effect. For the world has changed, and we must change along with it. As we consider the role that unfolds before us, we remember with humble gratitude those brave Americans who at this very hour patrol far-off deserts and distant mountains. They have something to tell us, just as the fallen heroes who lie in Arlington whisper through the ages. We honor them not only because they are the guardians of our liberty, but because they embody the spirit of service, a willingness to find meaning in something greater than themselves. And yet, at this moment, a moment that will define a generation, it is precisely this spirit that must inhabit us all. For as much as government can do and must do, it is ultimately the faith and determination of the American people upon which this nation relies. It is the kindness to take in a stranger when the levees break, the selflessness of workers who would rather cut their hours than see a friend lose their job, which sees us through our darkest hours. It is the firefighter's courage to storm a stairway filled with smoke, but also a parent's willingness to nurture a child that finally decides our fate. Our challenges may be new. The instruments with which we meet them may be new, but those values upon which our success depends, honesty and hard work, courage and fair play, tolerance and curiosity, loyalty and patriotism, these things are old. These things are true. They have been the quiet force of progress throughout our history. What is demanded then is a return to these truths. What is required of us now is a new era of responsibility, a recognition on the part of every American that we have a duty to ourselves, our nation and the world, duties that we do not grudgingly accept, but rather seize gladly, firm in the knowledge that there is nothing so satisfying to the spirit, so defining of our character, than giving our all to a difficult task. This is the price and promise of citizenship. This is the source of our confidence, the knowledge that God calls upon us to shape an uncertain destiny. This is the meaning of our liberty and our creed, why men and women and children of every race and every faith can join in celebration across this magnificent mall, and why a man whose father less than 60 years ago might not have been served in a local restaurant can now stand before you to take this most sacred oath. So let us mark this day with remembrance of who we are and how far we've traveled. In the year of America's birth, in the coldest of months, a small band of patriots huddled by dying campfires on the shores of an icy river. The capital was abandoned. The enemy was advancing. The snow was stained with blood. At the moment when our outcome of our revolution was most in doubt, the father of our nation ordered these words to be read to the people. Let it be told to the future world that in the depth of winter, when nothing but hope and virtue could survive, that the city and the country, alarmed at one common danger, came forth to meet it. America, in the face of our common dangers, in this winter of our hardship, let us remember these timeless words. With hope and virtue, let us brave once more these icy currents, and endure what storms may come. Let it be said by our children's children that when we were tested, we refused to let this journey end, that we did not turn back, nor did we falter, and with eyes fixed on the horizon and God's grace upon us, we carried forth that great gift and freedom and delivered it safely to future generations. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.
My brother went away to college this year. I didn't think I would miss him as much as I do, but I'm very aware of his absence. I imagine if I ever really lost my brother, as author Norman Maclean did, a part of me would forever call out to him. Norman and his younger brother Paul grew up along the Big Blackfoot River in western Montana. Their father was a Presbyterian minister and a fly fisherman. In their home, there was no clear distinction between religion and fly fishing. Even as the brothers grew up and apart and their lives took different paths, it was the river that always brought them back together. In these excerpts from his literary masterpiece, A River Runs Through It, Norman recalls the last fishing trip that he and Paul took with their father before the darker sides of Paul's life caught up to him. I could never tell how much my father knew about my brother. I assumed he knew a good deal because there is a substantial minority of every church congregation who regards it as their Christian duty to keep the preacher informed about the preacher's kids. At times, my father would start to talk to me about Paul. Did you hear what Paul did lately? He asked. I told him, I hear all kinds of things about Paul. Do you think you help him? He asked. I try to, I said. I don't even know whether he needs help. That's my trouble. We didn't often fish together anymore. Paul made the arrangements for what turned out to be our last fishing trip together. That day, the last 3 were the finest fish I ever caught. They weren't the biggest or the most spectacular, but they were 3 fish I caught because my brother waded across the river to give me the fly that would catch them. And because they were the last fish I ever caught fishing with him. After cleaning my fish, I located my father sitting high on the bank. He was reading. What have you been reading? I asked. A good book. In the part I was reading, it says the word was in the beginning, and that's right. I used to think that water was first, but if you listen carefully, you'll hear that the words are underneath the water. Well, that's because you're a preacher first and then a fisherman, I told him. If you ask Paul, he'll tell you that the words are formed out of the water. No, my father said. You are not listening carefully. The water runs over the words. Paul will tell you the same thing. Where is Paul, anyway? He'll be here when he catches his limit. I could already see him in the subterranean shadows. He was a man with a wand in the river. As he waded out, each circle of his arm inflated his chest, and we knew from his arm and his chest that all parts of him were saying, no small one for the last one. Everything was going into one big cast for one last big fish. His arm went high into a great arc, and the tip of his wand bent like a spring. There was an end to the action. Only water moved. Then the universe stepped on its third rail. The wand jumped convulsively. It tried to jump out of the man's right hand. The fish made 3 long runs before another act in the performance began. Although the act involved a big man and a big fish, it looked more like children playing. 2 or 3 more times, Paul worked him close only to have him swirl and return to the deep. Finally, he skidded him across the rocks back to the sandbar before the shockfish gasped and discovered he could not live in oxygen. The man put the wand down, got on his hands and knees in the sand, and then my brother stood up and with an uplifted arm proclaimed himself the victor. Something giant dangled from his fist. He came charging up the bank and dripped all over us like a young duck dog who in its joy forgets to shake itself. This was the last fish we were ever to see Paul catch. One close-up picture of him at the end of this day remains in my mind. Flies danced around his hatband. Large drops of water ran from under his hat onto his face and into his lips when he smiled. I remember him both as a distant abstraction and artistry, and as a close-up of water and laughter. "You are a fine fisherman," my father said. My brother said, "I'm pretty good with a rod, but I need 3 more years before I can think like a fish." A river has so many things to say that it's hard to know what it says to each of us. As we were packing our tackle and fish in the car, Paul repeated, "Just give me 3 more years." Later, I realized that the river somewhere, sometime, must have told me too that he would receive no such gift. For when the police sergeant early next May wakened me before daybreak, I rose and asked no questions. Together we drove down the length of the big Blackfoot River over forest floors to tell my father and mother that my brother had been beaten to death by the butt of a revival, and his body dumped in the alley. My mother turned and went to her bedroom where, in all a house full of men and rods and rifles, she had faced most of her great problems alone. She was never to ask me a question about the man she loved most and understood the least. When I finished talking to my father, he asked, "Is there anything else you can tell me?" Nearly all the bones in his hand were broken, I said. "In which hand?" he asked. "In his right hand," I said. From time to time, Paul's right hand had to be reaffirmed. My father had to derive what comfort he could from the faith that his son had died fighting. Once my father came back with the question, "Do you think I could have helped him?" "Do you think I could have helped him?" I answered. "How can a question be asked that answers a lifetime of questions? All I really know is that he was a fine fisherman." "You know more than that," my father said. "He was beautiful." This was the last he and I ever spoke to each other about Paul's death. Indirectly, though, he was present in many of our conversations. Now nearly all those I love and did not understand when I was young are dead, but I still reach out to them. You can love completely without complete understanding. Of course, now I'm too old to be much of a fisherman, and now I usually fish the big waters alone. In the Arctic half-light of the canyon, all existence fades into a being with my soul, and memories and the sounds of the big Blackfoot River, and the hope that a fish will rise. Eventually, all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. The river was cut by the world's great flood and runs over rocks from the basement of time. On some of the rocks are timeless raindrops. Under the rocks are the words, and some of the words are theirs. I am haunted by waters.
When someone betrays you, it is a reflection of their character. You get to see who they truly are. In an excerpt from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, written by J.K. Rowling, you get to see what it's like thinking that you know someone and then finding out that you don't. She marched towards the door, and as she did so, she raised her wand. From the tip burst 3 silver cats with spectacle markings around their eyes. The Patronuses ran sleekly ahead, filling the spiral staircase with silvery light, as Professor McGonagall, Harry, and Luna hurried back down. Along the corridors they raced, and one by one the Patronuses left them. Professor McGonagall's tartan dressing gown rustled over the floor, and Harry and Luna jogged behind her under the cloak. They had descended 2 more floors when another set of footsteps joined theirs. Harry heard them first. McGonagall, too, seemed to become aware of their company. She halted, raised her wand ready to duel, and said, "Who's there?" "It is I," said a low voice. From behind a suit of armor stepped Severus Snape. "Where are the Carrows?" he asked quietly. "Wherever you told them to be, I expect, Severus," said Professor McGonagall. Snape stepped near, and his eyes flitted over Professor McGonagall into the air around her, as if he knew that Harry were there. "I was under the impression," said Snape, that Alecto had apprehended an intruder. Really, said Professor McGonagall. And what gave you that impression? Snape made a slight flexing movement of his left arm where the dark mark had been branded into his skin. Oh, but naturally, said Professor McGonagall. You Death Eaters have your own private means of communication. I forgot. Snape pretended not to have heard her. I did not know it was your night to patrol the corridors, Minerva. You have some objection? I wonder what could have brought you out of your bed at this late hour. I thought I heard a disturbance, said Professor McGonagall. Really? But all seems calm. Snape looked into her eyes. Have you seen Harry Potter, Minerva? Because if you have, I must insist. Professor McGonagall moved fast. Her wand slashed through the air, and for a split second Harry thought that Snape must crumple unconscious, but the swiftness of his shield charm was such that McGonagall was thrown off balance. She brandished her wand at a torch on the wall, and it flew out of its bracket. Harry, about to curse Snape, was forced to pull Luna out of the way of the descending flames, which became a ring of fire and filled the corridor and flew like a lasso at Snape. Then it was no longer fire, but a great black serpent that McGonagall blasted to smoke, which reformed and solidified in seconds to become a swarm of pursuing daggers. Snape avoided them only by forcing the suit of armor in front of him, and with echoing clangs the daggers sank one after another into its breast. Harry saw Professors Flitwick and Sprout sprinting up the corridor along them in their nightclothes, with an enormous Professor Slughorn panting at the rear. Flitwick raising his wand, "You'll do no more murder at Hogwarts!" Flitwick's spell hit the suit of armor behind which Snape had taken shelter. With a clatter it came to life. Snape struggled free of the crushing arms and sent it flying back towards his attackers. Harry and Luna had to dive sideways to avoid it as it smashed into the wall and shattered. When Harry looked up again, Snape was in full flight. McGonagall, Flitwick, and Sprout all thundering after him. He hurtled into a classroom door, and moments later you heard McGonagall cry, "Coward! Coward!" "What's happened? What's happened?" asked Luna. Harry dragged her to her feet, and they raced along the corridor, trailing the invisibility cloak behind them, into the deserted classroom where Professors McGonagall, Flitwick, and Sprout were standing at the smashed window. "He jumped," said Professor McGonagall, as Harry and Luna ran into the room. "You mean he's dead?" Harry sprinted to the window, ignoring Flitwick and Sprout's yells of shock at his sudden appearance. "No, he's not dead," said McGonagall bitterly. "Unlike Dumbledore, he was still carrying a wand, and he seems to have learned a few new tricks from his master." With a tingle of horror, Harry saw in the distance a huge bat-like shape flying through the darkness toward the perimeter wall. There were heavy footfalls behind him and a great deal of puffing. Slughorn had just caught up. "Professor, we've got to barricade the school. He's coming now." "Very well. He who must not be named is coming," she told the other teachers. Sprout and Flitwick gasped, and Slughorn let out a low groan. "Potter has work to do on the castle on Dumbledore's orders. We need to put in place every protection of which we are capable, while Potter does what he needs to do." "You realize, of course, that nothing will be able to keep Uno out indefinitely," squeaked Flitwick. "But we can hold him up," said Professor Sprout. "Thank you, Pomona," said Professor McGonagall. "I suggest we establish basic protection around the place, then gather our students and meet in the Great Hall. Most must be evacuated, though if any of those who are over age wish to stay and fight, I think they ought to be given the chance." "Agreed," said Professor Sprout, already hurrying towards the door. "I shall meet you in the Great Hall in 20 minutes with my house." "I can act from here," said Flitwick, and although he could barely see out of it, he pointed his wand through the smashed window and started muttering incantations of great complexity. "We shall meet you and your Ravenclaws in the Great Hall, Phileas," said Professor McGonagall, beckoning to Harry and Luna to follow her. They had just reached the door when Slughorn rumbled into speech. "My word," he puffed, pale and sweaty, his walrus mustache a-quiver. "What to do? I am not sure whether this is wise, Minerva. He is bound to find a way in, you know, and anyone who has tried to delay him will be in most grievous peril." "I shall expect you and your Slytherins in the Great Hall in 20 minutes also," said Professor McGonagall. "If you wish to leave with your students, we shall not stop you. But if any of you attempt to sabotage our resistance or to take up arms against us within the castle, then, Horace, we duel to kill." "Minerva," he said aghast. "The time has come for Slytherin House to decide upon its loyalties," interrupted Professor McGonagall. "Go and wake your students, Horace." Harry and Luna ran after Professor McGonagall, who had taken up position in the middle of the corridor and raised her wand. "Puritotum, for heaven's sake, Filch, not now!" The aged caretaker had just come hobbling into view, shouting, "Students out of bed! Students in the corridors!" "They're supposed to be out of bed, you blithering idiot!" shouted McGonagall. "Now go and find something constructive. Find Peeves!" "Peeves," stammered Filch as though he had never heard the name before. Yes, Peeves, you fool, haven't you been complaining about him for a quarter of the century? Go and fetch him at once. Filch evidently thought Professor McGonagall had taken leave of her senses and hobbled away, hunch-shouldered, muttering under his breath. And now, Piro Notum, locomotor, cried Professor McGonagall, and along the corridor the statues in suits of armor jumped down from their cliffs. Harry knew that their fellows throughout the castle had done the same. Hogwarts is threatened, shouted Professor McGonagall. Man the boundaries, protect us. Do your duty to our school. Now, Potter, said McGonagall, you and Miss Lovegood had better return to your friends and bring them to the Great Hall. I shall arouse the other Gryffindors. They parted at the top of the staircase, Harry and Luna running back toward the concealed entrance of the room of requirement. Harry leaned against the enchanted wall which opened to admit them, and he and Luna sped back down the steep staircase. As the room came into view, Harry slipped down a few stairs in shock. It was packed, far more crowded than when it had been when he had last been in there. Kingsley and Lupin were looking up at him, as were Oliver Wood, Katie Bell, Angela Johnson, Bill and Fleur, and Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. Harry, what's happening? Voldemort's on his way. They're barricading the school. Snape's run for it. They're evacuating the younger kids, and everyone's meeting in the Great Hall to get organized. We're fighting.
Washington Irving was a famous writer in the 1800s. He's known for his essays, short stories, and novels, many of which have become great American classics. This is one of them, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. From the listless repose of the place, and the peculiar character of its inhabitants, who are descendants from the original Dutch settlers, this sequestered glen has long been known by the name of Sleepy Hollow. A drowsy, dreamy influence seems to hang over the land and to pervade the very atmosphere. Some say that the place was bewitched by a high German doctor during the early days of the settlement. Others, that an old Indian chief, the prophet or wizard of his tribe, held his powwows there before the country was discovered by Master Hendrik Hudson. Certain it is, the place still continues under the sway of some witching power that holds the spell over the minds of the good people, causing them to walk in a continual reverie. They are given to all kinds of marvelous beliefs, are subject to trances and visions, and frequently see strange sights, and hear music and voices in the air. The whole neighborhood abounds with local tales, haunted spots, and twilight superstitions. Stars shoot and meteors glare oftener across the valley than in any other part of the country. And the nightmare, with her whole ninefold, seems to make it the favorite scene of her gambols. The dominant spirit, however, that haunts this enchanted region, and seems to be commander-in-chief of all of the powers of the air, is the apparition of a figure of a horseman without a head. It is said by some to be the ghost of a Hessian trooper, whose head had been carried away by a cannonball in some nameless battle during the Revolutionary War, and who was ever and anon seen by the country folk, hurrying along in the gloom of the night, as if on the wings of the wind. His haunts are not confined to the valley, but extend at times to the adjacent roads, and especially to the vicinity of a church at no great distance. Indeed, the ghost rides forth to the scene of the battle in nightly quest of his head, and that the rushing speed in which he sometimes passes along the hollow, like a midnight blast, is owing to his being belated, and in a hurry to get back to churchyard before daybreak. Such is the general purport of this legendary superstition, which has furnished materials for many a wild story in that region of shadows, and the spectre is known at all the country firesides by the name of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. In this place-by-place of nature there abode a worthy wight by the name of Ichabod Crane, who sojourned, or, as he expressed it, tarried, in Sleepy Hollow, for the purpose of instructing the children of the vicinity. He was, in fact, an odd mixture of small shrewdness and simple credulity. His appetite for the marvelous and his powers of digesting it were equally extraordinary, and both had been increased by his residence in this spellbound region. No tale was too gross or too monstrous for his capacious swallow. It was often his delight, after his school was dismissed in the afternoon, to stretch himself on the rich bed of clover, bordering the little brook that whimpered by his schoolhouse, and there con over old Mother's direful tales, until the gathering dusk of evening made the printed page be a mist before his eyes. But if there was a pleasure in all this, in his humble resting place, for no spectre dared to show its face, it was dearly purchased by the terrors of his subsequent walk homeward. What fearful shapes and shadows beset his path, amidst the dim and ghastly glare of a snowy night! How often was he appalled by some shrub covered with snow, which, like a sheeted spectre, beset his very path! How often did he shrink with curdling awe at the sound of his own footsteps beneath his feet, and dread to look over his shoulder behind him! And how often was he thrown into complete dismay by some rushing blast, howling among the trees, in the idea that it was the galloping Hessian on one of his nightly scourings! It was the very witching time of night that Ichabod pursued his travels homewards, along the sides of the lofty hills which rise above the hollow, and which he had traversed so cheerily in the afternoon. No signs of life occurred near him. All the stories of ghosts and goblins that he had heard in the afternoon now came crowding upon his recollection. The night grew darker. The stars seemed to sink deeper into the sky, and driving clouds hid them from his sight. He had never felt so lonely and dismal. He was approaching the very place where many of the scenes of the ghost stories had been laid. Suddenly, he heard a groan. His teeth chattered. As he approached further, he beheld something huge, misshapen and towering. It seemed to gather up in the gloom, like some gigantic monster ready to spring upon him. He stammered, "Who are you?" He received no reply. Just then, the shadowy object of alarm put itself into motion. It appeared to be a horseman of large dimensions, mounted on a black horse of powerful frame. Ichabod's heart began to sink within him. Suddenly, he saw the goblin rising in his stirrups, in the act of hurtling his head towards him. Ichabod endeavored to dodge his horrible missile, but it was too late.
In The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, we get to explore Tim's life before, during, and after his service in the Vietnam War. In this specific selection, we get to see the pain Tim has dealt with after he was drafted into a war he didn't want to participate in. I spent the summer of 1968 working in an armor meatpacking plant in my hometown of Worthington, Minnesota. The plant specialized in pork products, and for 8 hours a day, I stood on a quarter-mile assembly line, more properly, a disassembly line, removing blood clots from the necks of dead pigs. My job title, I believe, was declotter. After slaughter, the hogs were decapitated, split down by the length of the belly, pried open, eviscerated, and strung up by the hind hocks on a high conveyor belt. Then gravity took over. By the time my carcass reached my spot on the line, the fluids had mostly drained out. Everything except for thick clots of blood in the neck and upper chest cavity. To remove this stuff, I used sort of a water gun. As a carcass passed by, you lean forward and swing the gun up against the clots and squeeze the trigger, all in one motion. And the brush would whirl and water would come shooting out, and you'd hear a quick splattering sound as the clots dissolved into a fine red mist. It was not pleasant work. Goggles were a necessity, and a rubber apron, but even so, it was like standing for 8 hours a day under a lukewarm blood shower. At night, I'd go home smelling of pig. It was tough getting dates that summer. And there was also that draft notice tucked away in my back pocket. In the evenings, I'd sometimes borrow my father's car, driving aimlessly around town, feeling sorry for myself, thinking about the war and the pig factory and how my life seemed to be collapsing towards slaughter. I felt paralyzed. All around me, the options seemed to be closing in, as if I was hurtling down a huge black funnel, the whole world squeezing in tight. There was no happy way out. Beyond all this, or at the very center, was the raw fact of terror. I didn't want to die. Not ever, but certainly not then, not there, not in a wrong war. I sometimes felt the fear spreading inside me like weeds. I imagined myself dead. I imagined myself doing things I could not do. Charging an enemy position? Taking aim at another human being? I feared the war, yes, but I also feared exile. I was afraid of walking away from my own life, my friends, and my family, my whole history, everything that mattered to me. You see, my hometown was a conservative little spot on the prairie, a place where tradition counted. And it was easy to imagine people sitting down at the good old Gobbler Cafe on Main Street, coffee cups poised, the conversation slowly zeroing in on the young O'Brien kid. How that damn sissy had taken off for Canada. At night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd sometimes carry on fierce arguments with those people. I'd be screaming at them, telling them how much I detested their blind, thoughtless, automatic acquiescence to it all. Their simple-minded patriotism, their prideful ignorance, their love it or leave it platitudes. How they were sending me off to fight a war they didn't understand. And didn't want to understand. I held them responsible. By God, yes I did. They didn't know Bao Dai from the Man in the Moon. They didn't know history. They didn't know the first thing about Diem's tyranny, or the nature of Vietnamese nationalism, or the long colonialism of the French. But, no matter. It was a war to stop the communists. Plain and simple. Which was how they liked things. And you were a treasonous pussy if you had second thoughts about killing or dying for plain and simple reasons. I was bitter, sure, but it was so much more than that. You see, the emotions went from outrage to guilt to bewilderment, and then back again to outrage. I felt the sickness inside of me, real disease. What I've never told is the full truth. How I cracked. How at work one morning, standing on the pig line, I felt something break open in my chest. I don't know what it was. I'll never know. But it was real, I know that much. It was a physical rupture, a cracking, leaking, popping feeling. I remember dropping my water gun. Slowly, without any thought, I took off my apron and walked out of the plant and drove home. It was mid-morning, I remember, and my house was empty. Down on my chest, there was still that leaking sensation, something very warm and precious spilling out. And I smelled like blood and hog steak. And for a long while, I just concentrated on holding myself together. I remember taking a hot shower. I remember for a few minutes I just stood still and I couldn't move. I remember packing a suitcase and carrying it out to the kitchen, standing very still for a few minutes, looking carefully at the familiar objects all around me. the odd chrome toaster, the telephone, the pink and white Formica on the kitchen counters, my house, my life. I'm not sure how long I stood there, but later I scribbled out a short note to my parents. What it said, exactly, I don't recall now. Something vague. Taking off. Will call. Love, Tim.
Have you ever looked at your wall for so long you almost go mad? Almost to the point where you begin to see something or someone within that wallpaper? Don't worry, you're not crazy. Because in Charlotte Gilman's short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, visions like this are quite normal. It is very seldom that mere ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer. A colonial mansion, a hereditary estate. Still, I will proudly declare that there is something queer about it. Else, why should it be let so cheaply? John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. You see, John is a physician, and perhaps that there's one reason I do not get well faster. You see, he does not believe I'm sick. And what can one do? If a physician of high standing and one's own husband assures friends and relatives that there is really nothing the matter but temporary nervous depression, what is one to do? We took the nursery at the top of the house. It is a big, airy room, but the paint and paper is stripped off in great patches. I never saw worse paper in my life. The color is repellent, almost revolting, strangely faded by the slow turning sunlight. It is a dull yet lurid orange in some places, a sickly sulfur tint in others. Ugh. We have been here for 2 weeks, and I'm sitting by this window now, up in this atrocious nursery. John does not know how much I really suffer, and laughs at me so about this wallpaper. I wish I could get well faster. But I must not think about that. This paper looks to me as if it knew what a vicious influence it had. There's a recurrent spot, the pattern, 2 bulbous eyes staring at you upside down, up and down and sideways they crawl, and those absurd unblinking eyes are everywhere. And it is like a woman stooping down and creeping about behind that pattern. I don't like it a bit. I wish John would take me away from here. I tried it last night, but John was asleep. So I kept still and watched the moonlight on that wallpaper till I felt creepy. The faint figure behind seemed to shake the pattern as if she wanted to get out. I got up softly and went to feel and see if that paper did move. And when I came back, John was awake. I told him that I really was not gaining here and that I wish he would take me away. "Why, dear," he said, "it is only 3 weeks more and then we will take a nice little trip. Really, dear, you are better. Better in body, perhaps, but..." I stopped short, for where he sat up straight and looked at me with such a stern, reproachful look that I could not say another word. So, of course, I said no more on that score and went to sleep. On a pattern like this, the color is hideous and unreliable and infuriating, but the pattern is torturing. I didn't realize for a long time what the thing was that showed behind that dim sub-pattern, but now I'm quite sure it is a woman. But there is something else about that paper, the smell. It creeps all over the house. I find it hovering in the dining room, skulking in the parlor, hiding in the hall, lying in wait for me on the stairs. Through watching so much at night when it changes so, I finally found out. The pattern does move, and no wonder. The woman behind shakes it. I see her in the long shaded lane creeping up and down. I see her in those dark grape arbors creeping all around the garden. I don't blame her a bit, but it must be very humiliating to be caught creeping at daylight. There are only 2 days more to get this paper off, and I believe John is beginning to notice. I don't like the look in his eyes. I must get to work. I peeled off all the paper I could reach standing on the floor. It sticks horribly, and the pattern just enjoys it. Why, there's John at the door. It is no use, young man. You can't open it. How he does call and pound. John, dear, said I in the gentlest voice. The key is down by the front steps. That silenced him for a few moments. Then he said, very quietly indeed, "Open the door, my darling." "I can't," said I. "The key is down by the front door." And I said it again several times, very gently and slowly. And he got it, of course, and he came in. He stopped short by the door. "What is the matter?" he cried. "For God's sake, what are you doing?" I looked at him over my shoulder. "I've got out at last," said I, "in spite of you. And I've pulled out most of the wallpaper, so you can't put me back." Now, why should that man have fainted? But he did.